For new watchers, welcome to the second panel, Serbia and NATO, New Governments, New Trends. First, there should be on your screen, down to the right, a globe that you can click on and pick Serbian or English. If you, and then you can follow. I will briefly introduce the panel first. We have from the Serbian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Sasha Kostic is a Minister Counselor at the Department for NATO and Partnership for Peace. The NATO representative is Ms. Carmen Romero. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy in the Public Diplomacy Division in NATO headquarters. It's Ms. Vesna Markovic, who is the Deputy Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia. And she is a Member of Parliament from the Serbian Progressive Party. We have Dr. Andrew Michta, who is the Dean of the George C. Marshall Center at the College of International and Security Studies. I've been informed that he will have to leave us at 1700 hours due to another pressing engagement, but I'm looking forward to have his insights before he leaves. Then we have Ms. Susanna Grubljic, who's the Director of the Center for Strategic Analysis and Prognosis and a former Vice Prime Minister of the Serbian government. And then last but not least, Jelena Milic, who's the Director of the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies here in Belgrade. I have asked each of the 6 panelists to start with a 5-minute introduction. I will then give each of them 2 to 3 minutes to respond to the introductions by the others before we start a debate and we bore into some of the questions that will have been raised and already have been raised by several of the initial speakers. I have asked very kindly, and I remind the speakers that we have 6 panelists and limited time, so please respect the timeline. And then the first speaker, Mr. Sasha Kostic from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Serbia. Please, Sasha.
Good morning, everyone. At the beginning, I would like to thank Mrs. Milic and the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies for inviting me to participate. And at the same time, I'd like to pass the greetings to Nikola Selakovic, Minister of Foreign Affairs, who unfortunately, due to some previous obligations, was unable to be one of the introductory speakers in the opening ceremony. I would just like to give a brief overview of our foreign policy priorities and the current situation in relations between Serbia and NATO. In the convocation of a government for 2012, Serbia has positioned itself as a credible, predictable partner and stability factor in the region. Security challenges are something that we all share, are common for us all. They are all transnational, regardless of whether we are talking about terrorism, organized crime, cyber, hybrid threats, proliferation of weapons and arms, illegal migrations, or human trafficking. This government will continue, together with the President of the Republic, to implement our current foreign policy course, that has improved our position as a country and built our reputation as a stable country. However, we do have a problem, as you know, with our relations with Kosovo. Since the final status of Kosovo has not been resolved, we understand that only constructive dialogue can help us find sustainable solution to the benefit of peace and stability of the region. Our priorities are protection of stability and territorial sovereignty of our country, membership in the EU, promotion of regional cooperation, nourishing partnership relations with all our allies and partners. This is something that we will stand behind in the future and further reaffirm our country on the global scene. Membership in the EU is our strategic objective. We are certain that EU integration of our region is the only guarantee of its peace and security and prosperity. We are using all the instruments available offered to us by the EU, including participating in various joint missions. We have adopted the joint security and defense strategy that is harmonized with global EU strategy. So we have confirmed once again that membership in EU is our primary objective. Stability and peace in the region is one of our priorities as well, because the region can be stable if there's instability in any of its parts and if the interest of one is being fulfilled against the interest of others. So we are a unified region, and we have to work and cooperate as such. And in that direction, it is of extreme importance to successfully implement initiative started by Aleksandar Vučić, President of Serbia, Prime Minister of Albania Edi Rama, and Zoran Zaev, Prime Minister of North Albania, entitled Mini Schengen. That will contribute creation of preconditions for economic development and strengthening stability of our region. Relations with NATO through Partnership for Peace program for Serbia represent an important area of foreign defense policy. They are clearly defined and are grounded in partnership cooperation in line with the military neutral policy of Serbia, without any pretensions of membership in the alliance, however, with full openness to continue developing cooperation in all areas of joint interest. In promotion of political dialogue between Serbia and NATO, we have strong contribution by meetings of General Secretary Jan Stoltenberg and President Vučić at the beginning of November of last year. Procedure of adoption of a second cycle of individual partnership action plan has been finalized. So IPAP, second cycle of IPAP has been signed from 2019 to 2021. New IPAP represents the continuity of the first cycle of IPAP that has been successfully implemented. Military neutrality is our clear, recognizable policy. Just as we respect the decision of our neighbors and partners to become members of NATO and other alliances, we are looking forward to cooperate with countries that are not members of NATO, and our position is quite clear, and we know that our partners understand it. We appreciate that our NATO partners understand and respect our position. Unfortunately, Serbia was under strong external pressures to step aside from our military neutrality policies and give up participation in military exercise in Belarus in order to ensure our principal positions. Serbia has brought a decision, the only possible decision at that time, to temporarily, for the period of 6 months, suspend all military cooperation exercises with all the external partners. This decision relates strictly to military cooperation and is implemented without exception. So in the upcoming period, members of our military will not participate in any activities with either military from the Western or Eastern countries. Of course, we are especially affected by the situation in Kosovo and Metohija. That is the greatest foreign policy challenge. We very much appreciate KFOR's activities in Kosovo and their strict implementation of UN Resolution 1244 mandate. We expect that KFOR remain in Kosovo and keep working proactively in order to prevent any kind of breach of the security situation in Kosovo. The situation in Kosovo and Metohija demands the continued, even enhanced presence of KFOR. This is why we appreciate NATO's position that the number of KFOR members is assessed in accordance with the situation on the ground and not some previously scheduled timetable. KFOR remains the only guarantor of the implementation of the UN resolution and protection of the Serbs who still remain living in Kosovo and the protection of their property and the property of Serbian Orthodox Church. So any withdrawal of KFOR would cause a breach of the violation of the resolution of 1244 and undermine the security in Kosovo. We know that there some attempts have been made to, on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, install a new security player on the ground for implementation of one-sided decisions on establishing the so-called Ministry of Defense of Kosovo and initiate the process of transformation of the so-called Kosovo security forces into Kosovo army. Such one-sided attempts of Prishtina represent the grave violation of the provisions of 1234 UN resolution and agreement from Kumanovo that give the mandate to KFOR solely when it comes to all the security issues on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija. International presence in Kosovo and any revision of the mandate can be declared null and void only via the new resolution of the UN. Cause for concern are also raised by the statements of representatives of the government of Pristina when it comes to compulsory military service for all Kosovo men in the length of 12 months. There is also an area of security around the monastery High Dechani that is continuously violated. It shows clearly that the Kosovo government does not uphold the decisions made by relevant institutions, including UNESCO, UN Organization for Protection of the Cultural Heritage. Finally, I want to reinstate that we are looking forward to further cooperation between NATO. We are looking forward to extending and enhancing our cooperation for the benefit of both sides in order to ensure stability and security of not just Serbia but the region. Relations between Serbia and NATO are delicate due to the heritage of the past and NATO bombing of then Yugoslavia without decision of the United Nations. I'm sorry, Mr. Kostic. Well, just 2 sentences. So these events of the past cannot be forgotten, and we will always remember, memorize our casualties. But we are certain that nothing like this should happen ever again. So this event that is called either NATO aggression or NATO campaign, and we insist on the fact that this was aggression, But we understand that we have different perspective on these events. However, both sides need to do everything to ensure that that nothing like this occurs again and the stability is maintained throughout the region. Thank you once again.
Mr. Kostic, for your comprehensive introduction. I will now hand over to Ms. Carmen Romero, the Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy of NATO. Please.
Good afternoon from Brussels. It is a pleasure to join you in this important discussion because we see Serbia as a very valued, respected, and also a very important partner for the alliance. And as my colleague Mark Di Paolo just said, Serbia is important to NATO and NATO is also important to Serbia. From the outset, I would like to stress what others have already said, which is that Serbia is really key to the stability of the Western Balkans. It's really a force for good in the Western Balkans, and stability in the Western Balkans goes hand in hand with stability in the Euro-Atlantic area. Both NATO and Serbia want peace, security, prosperity for our citizens, and we, with our partnership, are actively working together to help make this a reality. And this is why our partnership is worth for both sides. This panel is about assessing the NATO-Serbia relations in light of important recent events. One of them is our support to the fight against COVID-19. And this pandemic has been an unprecedented challenge to us all, and it continues to have a profound impact on our people and on our societies, on our economies. NATO, I would like to share with you what has done. NATO has responded in two ways to COVID-19. First, protecting our forces to remain ready to deal with any security threat, and also by making sure that this health crisis does not become a security crisis. And second, by showing strong solidarity supporting civilian efforts. NATO has facilitated the airlift of medical equipment, the transport of medical personnel and patients, and also the construction of field hospitals. We have shown solidarity with members of the alliance and with our partners. And something that I think is important is the fact that NATO has responded to all calls for assistance without distinction. This pandemic has demonstrated the value of nations working together and supporting each other. Individual NATO allies have provided critical medical assistance to Serbia and also to other countries in the Western Balkans. Turkey, for example, has provided masks and test kits to Serbia and other nations in the region. And also the Czech Republic has worked with Serbia to develop filters for masks. And this was done under a NATO umbrella, under a NATO program of cooperation amongst defense education institutions. Our alliance, in this case through KFOR, has provided medical equipment to all communities in Kosovo, and this includes the Serbian population as well as Serbian minorities in countries of the region. So NATO's response to this global crisis and the support provided to partners in the Western Balkans is, in my view, a tangible example of renewed trust in how mutually beneficial the relationship between Serbia and NATO is and will continue to be in the future. In times of need, we can help each other on top of the many other benefits of our political and practical partnership. COVID-19 has also led to an increase in disinformation and propaganda. You also asked me and asked the members of the panel to speak about this. In propaganda, disinformation is aiming to undermine our democracies and also deepen divisions. As we have seen, facts and clear communications can really save lives during a health crisis. And NATO has actually practiced this throughout the pandemic, communicating facts and also communicating about the key role that our militaries have been playing in support of national civilian efforts responding to this pandemic. Proactive, factual, and credible communications, in my view, are the best way to counter disinformation and also to help build resilience in our societies. This is why we are working very closely with civil society to support local projects to increase resilience to disinformation, both in our member states, but also in partner nations. The local expertise of civil society organizations cannot be matched. We have worked closely with a number of Serbian institutions to support our efforts to promote dialogue and also awareness about the alliance. One example of this was a series of 10 short videos that were titled Serbia and NATO 2020, View to the Future, and they were published by the Media and Reform Center, NIS. These videos were created in Serbia on topics directly linked to NATO to build understanding of our relationship and also increase resilience to fails against fails narratives. We have supported as well the Fund for Democratic and Social Initiatives, which is based in Serbia, to develop a timely, what I think is a timely documentary on women, COVID and security. And we have helped amplify this work across Serbia and internationally on digital channels. These are just two examples of the many grassroots projects that NATO and the Public Diplomacy Division of NATO supports to increase dialogue and understanding of our role in the region. We are always looking to broaden our relationship with civil society, and we would also welcome new proposals for projects from organizations from the civil society in Serbia. More broadly, we view coordination and cooperation as key to effectively counter disinformation. And this is a challenge that no one nation organization can address alone. So we are working very closely with others. And this is why we are also actively exploring new ways to engage with allies and partners, including Serbia. As we have seen, this is particularly important when dealing with a crisis that is very fast moving, such as COVID-19. You have also asked the members of this panel to speak briefly about the impact on NATO-Serbia relations of the ongoing efforts to normalize the situation between Belgrade and Prishtina. As you know, we are strong supporters of the EU-mediated dialogue, and we also welcome the recent agreement facilitated by the United States on the normalization of economic relations. Recent achievements are good for all of us because dialogue is the only way to go. So every political step towards a good relationship between Belgrade and Prishtina is critical not only for Serbia and Kosovo, but also for regional peace and for our own security, the security of the whole Euro-Atlantic area. Speaking now about the broader region, we all agree, I think, I have heard also this from Mr. Kostic, that KFOR continues to play an important role as a projector of stability in the region. And I can reassure you that KFOR will remain in Kosovo for as long as necessary. But we all know that the long-lasting solution can only be political. So this takes me to the last point, which is the importance of regional cooperation. This is essential for the stabilization of the Western Balkans. And in my view, the partnership between NATO and Serbia will continue to contribute to enhance regional cooperation. So now, just to conclude, I would like to stress a few points, is the fact that we in NATO care about our mature. Mr. Kostic said it's a delicate partnership, it's true, but I also see this as a very mature partnership between NATO and Serbia, and we stand ready to develop it further. It is only through cooperation and dialogue that we will create a stronger and more stable Western Balkans region. So despite our differences, we have many, but despite of them, NATO and Serbia relations will remain critical for both parties over the coming years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Romero. I will now hand over the word to Ms. Vesna Markovic, who's the Deputy Chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the National Assembly of the Republic of Serbia. Ms. Markovic, the floor is yours.
Hvala. Najprije bih želela da pozdravim sve učesnike ove konferencije I da se
First, I would like to thank the Center for Euro-Atlantic Studies and welcome all the colloquiators today. I think this is a topic that is very important to our general public, first and foremost. And later I will try to explain as to why I said that. The first association to NATO for general public is in 1999. And after 21 years, the very mention of NATO wakes negative emotions among our citizens. In spite of the fact that in the past 2 decades there were numerous positive activities and experiences not related solely to military activities, because NATO is not just a military but political alliance. So you might wonder why this is still so. At the moment when Serbia was bombed, there were 19 countries in NATO. Now there's 30. NATO does not have their own army. This is the army of the member states of NATO that jointly participate in operations. Some of the countries, members of the NATO, we see as very friendly, like Italy, for example, and their army has participated in bombing, and yet we still have very negative attitudes towards NATO alliance in general. The greatest foreign trade exchange, over 60%, the major investments are coming from the countries of EU, and the majority of these countries are EU member states, NATO member states. And when asked, our citizens believe the countries of the EU, who are at the same time member states of NATO, are the ones where they would like to live or where their children should get education. Norway, Sweden, Finland are also countries that we look up to, and most of our citizens have actually no idea how many of these countries are members of NATO and which are not. So we can see this in the result of the CEAS poll. So one of the reasons for this type of the public opinion is instrumentalization of general public opinion in the interest of various political parties. So some media or political parties try to manipulate this topic to the maximum. Media bear responsibility, but not just the media, but all of us in the political circles, all of us in public authorities have responsibility to inform our citizens about our primary foreign policy interests. Membership in EU is number one, as my colleague has mentioned. And there are some situations where you simply have to put emotions aside and be guided by your own interests and benefits coming from cooperation with partners, or in this particular case, NATO alliance. We should also raise awareness about the importance of the regional cooperation, of bilateral cooperation with the countries of the region, and it is of great interest for Serbia and NATO alliance in general to promote cooperation in combating terrorism, irregular migration, cyber attacks, the management of emergency responses and crisis management, like the one with pandemic of COVID. I'm sure that we will continue expanding our cooperation in all these levels. I will reflect the Washington Agreement briefly because it represents a new stage in relations between Serbia and United States. A new page has been opened in relations between our two countries, and the United States have recognized Serbia as a credible partner in the Balkan by establishing the development fund here in Belgrade. However, the Washington Agreement has introduced a new dimension, new component in relations between Belgrade and Prishtina as well in their dialogue, because it focused on economic cooperation, and I think it's of key importance to keep people in Kosovo to raise their quality of life. So creation of mini Schengen, this joint economic sphere, will definitely affect stability and peace in our region and overall economic development. meeting in Brussels in the presence of Matthew Pavlov and Miroslav Lajčák also contributed to promoting this dialogue further, because we are all aware that stability of the region largely depends on improvement of relations between Belgrade and Prishtina. I hope I was brief enough. And I'm sure that there will be some questions later on.
Thank you, Ms. Markovic. The next panelist is the Dean of the George C. Marshall Center, the College of International and Security Studies, Mr. Andrew Mitchell. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to the hosts and our Serbian friends for inviting me to speak. I am speaking in my private capacity as analyst, not necessarily representing the views of the Marshall Center or the Defense Department. I'd like to make 3 points very briefly, if I may, about the impact of this pandemic on NATO and the transatlantic community, broadly speaking. The first and the most important one will be consensus on China as a power in Europe. The COVID has shifted a lot of attention to China's role, China's behavior in the international system. The United States looks at China as both a military problem set and an economic problem set. In Europe, my assessment is China is viewed still predominantly from the economic perspective. There has been some changes, a more level-headed approach to how China has behaved in Europe and in the larger transatlantic community. I think this will be a key priority. And I think a NATO high reflection group that's currently working on this, led by Wes Mitchell and Thomas de Maizière, is going to address that issue. I think it has to be addressed. The second one is the stress on defense budgets. To manage the impact of the pandemic, both the United States and our allies have spent huge amounts of money. And that is coming at a time when maintaining defense spending levels that the alliance has agreed to reach and rebuilding real usable exercised capabilities is a key challenge, especially in light of the revisionist pressure from Russia on the eastern flank and the larger global pressure from China worldwide. So that will be a huge impact of COVID. And we don't really know at this point to what extent the government priorities across the alliance will need to shift to respond to this. The third one, very briefly, and that was already mentioned by the NATO representative, coordinating our messaging and countering Chinese misinformation in this era of great power competition. I think this will be a critical task for the alliance. I think we're going to be rediscovering that we are an alliance of values, first and foremost, that we share those core principles, and no amount of transatlantic friction or bickering can overshadow that particular aspect. We are an alliance of free people. And those values are absolutely critical going forward, especially now as we are confronted not just with one near-peer military competitor, as we did during the Cold War, but in fact two. While I mentioned early on that Russia is a revisionist power, it wants to revise the post-Cold War order, China actually wants to replace the existing liberal international order with an order based on its values and on its priorities. I think NATO solidarity, allied solidarity, especially as we're exiting this crisis, being able to truly work with each other, whether it's about sharing information, distributing vaccine, distributing therapeutics, maintaining our resourcing of our defenses will be absolutely critical. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Hvala. Sljedeći panelista je Suzana Grubješić, koja je direktorka Centra za spoljnu analizu i bivša potpredsjednica Vlade Republike Srbije. Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, your Serbian is excellent. Thank you. Just like everyone, I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to Center to Euro-Atlantic Studies. And as 5 o'clock is approaching, we are always keeping shorter and shorter our contributions. So I'll try to not reiterate what the previous speakers have been saying about cooperation between Serbia and NATO and between Serbia and United States. I will try to open the issue of our military neutrality a bit, because Serbia is surrounded by NATO member states, and in addition to everything, membership in NATO and membership, first and foremost, in EU means being aligned with common foreign and security policy. Military neutrality can, on one hand, be one of the obstacles to accession to EU, but on the other hand, it is not impossible that Serbian status as military neutral country in the perspective be acceptable by other EU member states. The question is just whether it's in the interest of Serbia, but is it plausible at all, bearing in mind the new security challenges where neutrality cannot respond fully? Our military neutrality has been declared in 2007 with the resolution of our National Assembly. But last year, in 2019, it was once again confirmed through 2 strategic documents, National Defense Strategy and National Security Strategy. And they both state that cooperation with NATO is in the interest, and cooperation with Russian military is our orientation. So we have clearly declared a military neutrality, and I don't think that there's a clear decision by our foreign partners to accept this as a principle. We often compare ourselves with the 7 military neutral states who are EU members, who have a permanent neutrality that is practically incomparable with ours, because it's grounded on a different historical context, and their neutrality was more of expression or compromise between great powers than their own personal decision. Austria, Switzerland, Ireland, Finland, Cyprus and Malta. And I think that our military neutrality can mostly be compared with Moldavia, but is also declared military neutrality due to problems that they have with a part of their territory. And this was the case with Serbia, with Kosovo, with the state policy towards Kosovo. Military neutrality was declared in 2007, once again confirmed these 2 strategic documents, as I mentioned, in 2019. So it's not defined by domestic legislation. It's not defined by our constitution. Constitution was adopted in 2006, a year before military neutrality was declared. But if the constitution is to be changed and amended due to membership in EU, because certainly this is going to happen, at least when it comes to a couple of its provisions, military neutrality would have to be introduced in the constitution. And this would also entail developing our own military industry and our own military that practically solely relies on our own devices when it comes to equipment, when it comes to education and training, etc. Defense of the interest is to promote national security through the active EU integrations. So this is where Angelina mentioned comes into fore, and this is common foreign and security policy. Our general public does not know to what extent our country participates with European Defence Agency and to what extent are we being harmonized with European Union. Because for Serbia, it can be very interesting to participate in permanent European structured cooperation because since we are striving to become a member, we could simply continue our policy of military neutrality because the members of PESCO are also military neutral countries who are EU member states. And through participation in PESCO, their status is not put in question. European Union is through for its policies affecting changes of military neutrality of certain member states, but not change of the overall concept of neutrality. So this is what I wanted to highlight. Just let me summarize. So Serbia can have a problem in the process of accession, harmonization with common foreign and security policy. But on the other hand, it's not necessarily going to be a problem because depending on how the process is going to be established, the country itself can decide upon this issue. So this is so much from me.
The next speaker needs no introduction. It is, of course, the director of CEAS, Jelena Milic. The floor is yours.
Hvala.
Ms. Grubišić gave me an excellent segue into the fact that we may have issues regarding European integration. Ms. Eichhorst mentioned that already. The European Union already is a security community, but since no one mentioned the presentations and latest opinion polls that we sent to you, let me use this opportunity to say 46% of Serbian citizens said that European integration needs to continue if the European Union becomes a defense community. So arguments regarding military neutrality and NATO do not have much to do with military neutrality. For 10 years or 20 years, we can talk like let's forget the past and look towards the future. We can talk for 20 years that NATO is good for the economy, but it's to no avail. Serbia is a special case because of the bombing and because of the Kosovo negotiations. Also, we can talk as much as we want about fighting disinformation in principle, and we have a new term now, the pandemic. For years, Serbia has been the ground of a hybrid disinformation campaign by people who are very influential in the faculty of medicine, and but it's supported by Sputnik and by Russia, and an increasing number of documentaries that are being used to promote this around the world. We fought as much as we could, probably destroying CEAS in the whole process. We never had means to fight disinformation. You have fact checkers wherever you want, but we are above this. The problem is the fact that 80% of Serbian citizens believe that there is a cancer epidemic in Serbia, which is directly caused by the use of depleted uranium in the bombing. Add to this the fact that we hear 2 or 3 sentences a year disputing this, that NATO ambassadors in the country rarely tried to fight this on a daily basis, because this is something that's being done on a daily basis. We have this person saying that the World Health Organization is an exponent of the military industrial complex of the US, that the vaccines for MMR and smallpox may be poisoned due to the pressure to recognize Kosovo. This is a professor of the Faculty of Medicine in Belgrade, 2 days ago, who 2 days ago received a medal. So I know a few things myself. Maybe Sasha can confirm how many other civil society organizations came to him and to Ambassador Filipovic and sat with him for 3 or 4 hours, going word per word for the second cycle of the individual partnership action plan, just like CEAS and myself did. But this other thing needs to be tackled as well. The results are showing this. It's horrible that so few Serbian citizens understand that most EU members are also members of NATO. So who is responsible here? People often say that all results would be much better if only CEAS and Jelena Milic didn't deal with NATO. But I never saw that we ever forbade anyone to deal with these topics. There are many organizations, civil society, that deal with disinformation and websites. None of their findings never cross to the dark side, and try to address this on national television. But let us not include these talks about European integration and boil them down to just negotiations and not mention all the points of cooperation between the European Union and NATO. So why not mention this? We need to mention this every day, because the other side uses all moments of misunderstandings between the European Union, NATO, and Serbia. We cannot clusterize ourselves. These 80% of Serbian citizens who support strengthening cooperation with NATO, this it happened in the past 4 years when we saw, and as the director of CEAS, I supported this. There was this kind of separation from NATO and the bombing and a return to history. So we returned to history. We talked about large partnerships. I would like to close this part of my by this quote from the Wall Street Journal. If we have to fight Sputnik here every day with war criminals and murderers, I think we don't have to fight Wall Street Journal. Did anyone in NATO ever respond to this? I think it would be useful. Thank you.
Thank you. I did say initially that we would have each of you would come back, but as a collective, the panel has used quite a large amount of time, so we will move directly to a discussion. And since Professor Michta will be the first to leave us, I will ask him to comment as an analyst. And of course, there is a lot of very interesting and very important themes that I've brought up. But I ask you what Sasha Kostic started with, by stating very clearly that the strategic goal of Serbia is an EU membership. And we were also reminded, both in the previous panel at the opening by Angelina Eichhorst, that EU is becoming a security union. And she gave a very strong call for Serbia to move towards the EU's foreign and security policy, because that is a direct result of Serbia's strategic aim. Professor, could you talk as an analyst, how do you see this this influencing on it's on a tangent to the NATO relationship, but it influences Serbia's strategic world. How do you see this? I now get the message that he already has had to leave us, and then I will. The question that I already asked to him, I asked the rest of the panel to answer, and then maybe I can start with the one who has had to now been quiet for the longest, Mr. Sasha Kostic.
Hvala.
Thank you. When it comes to relations between Serbia and European Union, I've already mentioned that the successful process of accession, strategic objective of Serbia. We all spoke about the concept of military neutrality and sustainability or preserving this military neutrality in the process of accession to EU. I have to highlight that neutrality, military neutrality, does not mean isolation. In cooperation with NATO, just as an example, Serbia is building its capacity for participation in multinational international missions of both EU and the UN. So the process of cooperation with EU and NATO is very much complementary. Neutrality as a concept is very broad, as Mrs. Suzana Grubjušić elaborated, and of course we can talk at length about what military neutrality of Sweden means, or military non-alignment of Finland, or constitutional neutrality of Switzerland, but when it comes to Serbia, membership in NATO is not a topic, neither for Serbia nor for NATO at this moment in time. The topic is extending and enhancing our cooperation, and I think that there's huge potential for both. I'm not going to take more of your time, so this is what I wanted to say.
On this question.
The floor? Well, what the question about Serbia joining the European Union, I can say from a NATO perspective that NATO strongly supports Serbia becoming a member of the European Union, because this will increase security, this will increase stability, not only in Serbia, but also in the Western Balkans and in the Euro-Atlantic community. And if I may, I wanted to say that very interesting points have been made during these interventions, and I wanted to comment on some of the points. For example, Mr. Kostic, it's great to share this platform with you. We have worked for many years together in the NATO corridors, and we have been coordinated public communications. I agree with Mr. Kostic on the fact that Serbia is a credible partner in the region and also for NATO. And I also agree with him that NATO fully respects the fact that NATO membership is not a topic in Serbia, and that's something that NATO fully respects, while also Serbia is working on becoming a member of the European Union, and while Serbia continues to cooperate very, very closely with with NATO. So both things are compatible and actually complement each other. I would like to say Vesna Markovic, she made very, very interesting points about the Serbian public opinion. Serbian public opinion very much respected by NATO. And actually, I fully understand the fact that when NATO is being raised in Serbia, it awakens, as you said, negative emotions in public. And as you know, the Secretary General of NATO has done everything to share his regrets and his condolences with the victims, the families of the victims of the bombing. And it's very important. I think what you said, Vesna, is important in the sense that we, public authorities, institutions like NATO, we have the responsibility to explain to our public opinions the benefits of this cooperation and partnership, and that the past is very painful, but we need to look into the future. And this is why it's important that we work with the civil society in Serbia, and that we talk to each other, that we increase dialogue, and that we increase understanding, because only by doing this together, the public opinion in Serbia will be able to judge on their own. And I'm very concerned about the results of the opinion poll. And I think that it is really our responsibility to do everything in a credible, in a factual way to increase the awareness of the benefits that this partnership brings to all of us.
Ms. Markovic, intervention already has drawn comments, and it would be interesting. You pointed at interesting facts in your opening about the public opinion. It would be interesting to ask you, how can you, from a position in the Serbian parliament and also the Serbian government, you of course belong to the majority party, how can you contribute to change this public opinion?
If I answered your question directly, the answer would be very difficult. Exactly because of the fact that we need media support, and we have none, or sufficient media support regarding this topic. And also, there is disinformation that Jelena mentioned. Jelena is the only one who mentioned it. And it's very difficult to counter this. You know, we cannot, as a country, prevent someone from spreading disinformation. That is a very hard thing to do. This is something that I participated in numerous conferences in Brussels and elsewhere in the European Union where the topic was fake news, but no one really had a specific solution as to how we can combat this in the proper way. I hope that in the future we may find a way, if we're talking about the truth. Speaking the truth is one of the ways, but there's another thing that I wanted to mention before you asked this question. I wanted to comment on the fact that the results of the poll regarding support to the European Union. Jelena said that it's 46%, so I would say that for years it's been around 50%. But I think this is a very high percentage given the fact that the European Union does not deal with enlargement as it had in the period before Brexit, before the migrant crisis, before terrorist attacks, before 2015. The European Union is facing its own internal challenges and problems. The proposal of France is to deal with its own internal problems and then to discuss enlargement. So this is the messaging that is reaching the Serbian population, which is why I think this percentage is actually very high, given the messages that we're receiving. And I agree with anyone who's saying that enlargement is important not only for the stability of the region, but also for the stability of the European Union, because of all the reasons I mentioned, which is also the reasons why it is important to cooperate not only with the European Union, but also with the alliance, because of counterterrorism and the current challenges regarding COVID. So I won't mention all these examples, but I want to say that Serbia opened, out of a total of 35 chapters, it opened 18 chapters. I have been a member of the European integration team. So the most problematic chapter is chapter 35 regarding relations between Belgrade and Prishtina. This is a specific point that no other candidate had, and our membership and further progress, as I have already said, depends on the progress of our dialogue with Pristina. But if we consider the dialogue and everything that's happening and the pause that we have had since the Washington Agreement and all other events in the European Union, I think that this moment, of course, if we consider the pandemic as well, at this moment it is very hard to deal with all these challenges and to deal with the opening of every chapter and progress in this direction.
Susanna, your initial comments already has evoked comments and reflection among the other panelists. Another topic that was touched upon was that when Mr. Stoltenberg was here 2 years ago now, he very publicly and symbolically said to the Serbian people that he regrets the loss of innocent life. And it is now 21 years. So there are, is there a reciprocal move on the Serbian side to meet that open hand from Mr. Stoltenberg? Because that was a very emotional way of going about it. So is there a reciprocal move from the Serbian side? And what could that be? And where could that lead us?
The way I see the reciprocity where we could meet is a foreign policy strategy of Serbia where European integration, cooperation with NATO would be included, and regional cooperation as well. So it would be clearer if we had a clear foreign policy strategy. It would be easier to deal with accession. Chapter 31 is also another specific thing that we have. 31 is alignment with the common foreign policy and defense policy of the European Union, regardless of the fact that we are in the accession process we have been since 2014. We can't even open this chapter and let alone speak about closing it. So we have no screening report. It's questionable whether or when we will receive it, because our percentage of compliance with the common European foreign policy was only 48 for this year and 60% for last year. So there are some things that should be done, but since most citizens in Serbia and the majority of the international community and Serbian authorities support the concept of military neutrality, I think that this will remain the policy in the coming period. The European Union will not change its policy regarding Russia, nor will we change our own policy drastically. So we will be in this limbo where we cannot open this important chapter towards the European Union.
Jelena Milic, you are now at the 8th NATO week, and it is, I think, pertinent to ask you, where have you seen the relationship between Serbia and NATO develop over the course of 8 NATO weeks? Maybe you can reflect on the developments that you have seen, and so maybe we can then see from the retrospect how we can move forward.
Interesantno mi je da gospođa Romero
It is interesting to me, Mrs. Romero has referred to all other panelists except mine, but it is very good that General Secretary has apologized for civilian victims and expressed his condolences, and this is something that needs to be reiterated as often as possible. This is actually the 10th NATO week in 8 years. To be more precise, the relations are actually very good. Some accuse me that the relations would be much better without me, but the very fact that Serbia is participating in NATO missions organized by NATO, that we have trained medical experts for Iraq, does not go in hand with the rhetorics either of the state or the rhetorics of the media, which is why only a very small percentage of citizens support our membership in NATO, and yet more than 50% would support actually becoming members of EU, even if EU becomes a security organization. So we have to bear in mind that the citizens are actually not quite aware of how many members of EU are also the members of NATO. It will actually be of great assistance if the ambassadors to Serbia who are coming from EU member states would mention it when they address the general public in Serbia. Unfortunately, our media are very much focused on reporting about some sensational news and finding things to accuse President Vučić of making a mistake when he's stating GDP figures or bragging with some economic success that Serbia has achieved. CEAS, unfortunately, is very much on its own in promoting membership in NATO. I would love to see other CSOs offer support to this, but this is not happening. And let me just close my intervention with a brief observation. I'm not moaning and complaining, but rather trying to summarize as to what to do next. What are the lessons of these 10 conferences? It took 3 mails to communicate with Deputy Assistant of the State Department and the top-ranking officials of the United States, and we finished everything ever since. And actually, since then, nobody bothered me with minutiae or details. We have invited to this conference all leading think tanks focusing on European integrations whose assessment affect the progress report of the EU. and the general image created about Serbia in the center of powers and where the political decision makers are when it comes to the policies towards Serbia. Only Mrs. Grubisic has agreed, and all other think tanks have actually dismissed us and our invitations. So bear this in mind as well.
That was raised by Professor Michta was the stress on budgets in general and defense budget in particular as a result of COVID-19. And we know all that Serbia is in the unfortunate situation that its GDP is at the same level that it was 30 years ago, before the decade of troubles, if we can call it that. So the economy is of, and President Vučić has said so on many occasions, that it's vital to Serbia. If we then look at the largest conflict which has ever ridden this world, the Second World War, the two countries who were the main losers, Japan and Germany, 20 years after the World War was over, were economic miracles. Are there anything that can be learned from the German and Japanese example after the Second World War by Serbia? And I ask this openly and take the floor if someone wants to answer.
So I will not elaborate on how also Serbia could become an economic miracle, which I hope it will happen. But what I can say in relation to defense spending and investment in our security is what the Secretary General of NATO very often says, and it is that with COVID-19, our security challenges have not diminished. The contrary, our security challenges have become even more unpredictable, and this is why, despite the difficult economic situation, it's important that all of us continue to invest in our security and continue to invest in our prosperity, which is basically in the defense, because we have seen the important role that our armed forces can play in supporting civilian efforts in response to a crisis such as of this pandemic, and resilience is very important. So we need to think about that. The fact that there is a downturn in our economies doesn't mean that we will not. We will have to continue to invest in our security, and actually, by investing in security and defense, this can also create economic opportunities also for our people.
Any of the others in the panel want to comment? Wants to comment. I got that in like that.
Before I forget, soon the trial before domestic courts in Serbia will begin for members of NATO due to the alleged effects of depleted uranium. They will be aided by a lawyer from Italy. I talked to Stefano Stefanini, about whom, and Dr. Radovanovic, everyone tried to explain this to me. So a court cannot dispute medical findings and facts. An Italian attorney is here. He's in the media every day. So pay close attention to this. 4 or 5 is low, but let us not go into negative numbers. Thank you.
Any of the others in the panels want to comment on that question, or we move on to the next question? Mr. Kostic, as it was mentioned earlier that at the opening by Ms. Angelina Eichhorst, that the EU was very happy with Serbia joining the EU's declarations on Belarusia and on Nagorno-Karabakh. Can you say something about the process leading towards such a decision, and how to join such declaration, because it's a big step for any country to join declarations of an organization it's not part of. So maybe you could say something about this, and also about how you look about similar topics in the future.
Sure.
Thank you for the question. Serbia is committed to, in this European integration process, Serbia is committed to gradually aligning its foreign and security policy with the positions of the European Union. This is a process. Ms. Grubješić mentioned that this percentage was around 60% last year. We have a commitment to, before actual accession to the European Union, fully align our position with the positions of the European Union, which will be the fact at the moment when the accession process is ended. Until this moment, Serbia assesses on a case-to-case basis its own position, and based on this, it joins or fails to join, decides not to join the positions and declarations of the European Union. We assess this primarily based on our own foreign policy priorities and national and state interests. In this specific case, the two declarations on Belarus, Serbia decided to join this declaration. The European Union is an important partner. NATO is an important partner for us. But also China is an important partner, and the Russian Federation as well, in many areas, especially in the area of energy. In any case, Serbia, in its decision-making regarding joining declarations of the European Union, it assesses whether our position can have an impact on support to our own national interests. That is the status of Kosovo, or our position in the defense of Security Council Resolution 1244. In any case, as I have mentioned myself, and Ms. Laura Cooper also mentioned in her introductory speech, so I will paraphrase. She said that Serbia is not sitting on two chairs, but it is responsibly building its own position in the international scene, and it wishes to have a place at the table on its own chair. Thank you.
Approximately 3 minutes left, so before I hand over to the next panel, if there is anyone else who would like to comment on this question, please.
Not on that, no.
Well, we are then right on time, and I would like to thank the 6 panelists who have given us very important insights. Mr. Sasha Kostic, Ms. Carmen Romero, Ms. Vesna Markovic, Professor Andrew Micha, Ms. Susana Grubicic, and last but not least, Ms. Jelena Milic. Thank you all for your contributions and for an open and good debate of many important questions and aspects. The next panel, panel 3, is This Is Us, Serbia 2020, where the latest CEAS opinion poll will be represented. And I have the great pleasure of handing over to a fellow Scandinavian again, Jörgen Samsø. It is now you who are on the floor, and I apologize for not having lived up to your standard, but I hope that you will now rectify everything and make this go smoothly in the continuation. The floor is yours.